Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Morgan, editor of Fleet Equipment. Welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today, we're talking with Jordan Raymer, founder and CEO of EV Connects. Jordan, thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks for having me today, Jason.
So, we're going to be talking electric charging infrastructure, which is a big topic that I know very little about. The trucking market is evolving rapidly. We've just seen a number of announcements here from a number of OEMs that are starting to put out electric trucks for sale. Fleets can buy them. So I was happy to that you could take the time to kind of walk us through some of the charging infrastructure basics and really give us a groundwork for what we can expect. So we'll just start there. Let's hit the basics, right? If I'm a trucking fleet looking to install charging infrastructure at my location, where do I start?
Yeah, Jason, it's a good question. And there's a lot of customers, an increasing number of customers that are really asking those questions to themselves. One really good place to start, obviously, selfishly, is with EV Connect. We have a what we call a customer journey that we walk our prospects through, and it really has three key steps to it. One, the first step is what we call assess. The second is what we call deploy, and then the last step is manage. And those three uh, steps are critical to the overall success of any EV charging program or activity. And so assess is really the a place where you want to start. You want to understand, how many charging stations do I need? Where do I need them to go? What power levels do I need? Those kinds of things. Am I going to use is this a depot application? Am I going to use roaming out in what we call the wild? Um, and once you've figured that out and really designed and engineered what you want, then you move into the deploy process. And that's where we'll often bring in partners who can help actually do the installation and deployment of these charging stations for you. Um, Once you've figured that all out and you've deployed all of the stations, you start to move into the manage part of the process, and that's really where EV Connect's core business is focused. You've got charging stations; they're connected to our software platform, and we help to manage all sorts of activities around uptime and access control and data and analytics and security and grid management and energy management. And that really makes the value of what you've invested in from a charging infrastructure standpoint useful.
Right, right. And, I think that's a good point to stress too. And what I'm starting to understand as well is how software driven a lot of this charging infrastructure and management is, right? Not only to your point on the management of when you're charging, how much you're charging, understanding that capability, but then also I know I've talked with truck OEMs on the truck side in regard to what software they actually have on the truck and how that relates to the charging station. Because you could plug it in, and if your software is compatible, the truck's not charging, even though it's plugged into the station, right? And then you want to make sure you're getting all that information back to whatever management system you're using to make sure you're getting your charge times and all sorts of complicated stuff. And that's kind of the next question here is like, what do I need to understand? Can you help me boil down all this complexity in terms of charging software and what I need in terms of capabilities?
Yeah, yeah. So the the thing that I like to emphasize is you really do want to uh, build and think about the building for the future, right? There's sort of where the market is today, and then there's where the market's going to be, and you want a software platform that's going to make sure that you're future proofed. Right? You don't want to end up investing in something that ends up getting orphaned. And so that's where when we've been thinking about this market, and we've been at it now for over 10 years as a business, focused exclusively on EV charging and electricity as a fuel, the number one thing that we like to emphasize being is really getting a future-proof platform that's open standards based. Open standards are really important, and what that does is that enables all sorts of things. One, it enables your ability to use all different kinds of charging station hardware. So you may think, oh, I'm just going to go buy this piece of hardware and it's going to work for me down the road. But if it isn't open standards based and it doesn't allow you to work with other pieces of software or other hardware in the future, or even you may want to use different manufacturers and mix that up based on the sophistication of your application, that's really important. Another part of open standards that's important is getting an ability to integrate into the vehicle systems, and you mentioned that, Jason. And so we are huge believers in what we call open API, and that's an ability to give our customers opportunities to integrate into other systems, especially their vehicle and other fueling systems. So that's one key, and I would just put that under like open platform as a strong consideration for the needs of a software platform. The other pieces to think about are data and analytics. It's one thing to be able to fuel the vehicle at the simplest form, but it's another thing to really be able to understand how those vehicles are being used and then being able to optimize for it. So that gets from data analytics into business intelligence and thinking about, okay, maybe I only am doing this on a relatively small basis now because I'm only transitioning only a part of my fleet, but I'm going to transition more of it, right? And so how do you make sure that you have the data so that you can do the analysis going forward and you have the business intelligence to then be able to grow your transition better and faster and more cost effectively? So that's another consideration. A third that's extremely important for fleets is reliability and the service of the charging infrastructure. So if software becomes critically important because it's not just about being able to deliver the fuel, and it's not just about being able to know whether it's being delivered, but it's also making sure that it's being delivered consistently and that you can rely on it. And one of our key goals as an organization is to make sure that the delivery of electricity as a fuel to our customers is more reliable than it is with an internal combustion based vehicle. So understanding, we give service level agreements to our customers. We stand by 99.9% uptime. We're there with great customer support if there's ever needs for that. So that's another really important aspect that's a bolt on to the actual software, but you can't get that unless you have really good software. There's also aspects around energy management and grid management, which is really about bringing down your total cost of ownership. And so if you don't have the ability to load shift, shift the usage of when charging is being used, enabling the utility to curtail load at the appropriate times, which can give you discounts on your utility bill. All of the aspects around energy management, that's enabled by the software that you can't forget, and that drives return on investment, right? Making sure that you're maximizing the investment that you're making, but minimizing your total cost.
Right, for sure. And a lot of that is based on the analysis and the data that you can get in. I want to take a step back real quick. I do want to follow up on that, but to really stress on your point about the open standards and open platform, because I think it's easy to get glossed over and really not even understand what that means, right? And for fleets that are seeing it in the data world, trying to integrate different telematic systems in terms of what they already have operationally with diesel, it seems like it's the same game here, right? You want to make sure that you're working with partners that are going to work with your other partners and maybe shy away from or know the challenges of a proprietary system, whether that's software or hardware. Is that fair?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And that's, and getting down into the economics, if you're on a proprietary system, it will cost you more in the long run, right? That's just the way it works. And so we've embraced open standards and the openness of our platform and working with as many partners as we possibly can in all facets of the market, really in the understanding that fleets will ultimately want to keep their costs down to the lowest level possible. And proprietary solutions are, that makes it really challenging.
Right. No, and I think that's still evolving in our industry. And I think it's a good point that fleets need to demand that, right? You can't just, many fleets have run many nameplates. There are a few that are really beholden to one, right? They want to make sure that they can charge one truck brand A and charge brand B with the same stuff. Going into the analytics side, right? Because you've touched on it here, but I kind of want to dive into this at least on the surface. I
Sure.
don't,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there's a lot going on there. Okay, so we got the infrastructure set up. I have my plan, right? As I'm charging my trucks, working through that plan. Um, in the software terms, what should I see in the analysis? Where's the low hanging fruit that are going to help me make some of those decisions you mentioned as to how efficiently I'm charging my vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a key one for us is just your cost per kilowatt hour, right? If you can minimize, uh, important is many utilities have time of use rates, so that means that, and typically it follows a pattern of, the business day is the most expensive time to fuel, and so to the extent that you can shift your load to, uh, call it, um, non-business parts of the day, or off hours, that will reduce your electricity cost, and ultimately your fuel costs. And so, to the extent you can do that, that's a very important piece. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. One is, just simply, not allowing drivers to fuel until after their shift. It may be simply setting the chargers with certain capabilities of the software, so that you can plug in, but then it doesn't start until another time period. It can be also, there's also demand charges, which is typically you have a certain amount, there's a certain amount of, demand that our customers can take from the utility at any given time. And so the
Okay.
ability to spread that out as much as possible and make sure that not everybody's plugging in, say, at the end of a shift and hitting a spike, that becomes a problem, and that costs the customer more money. So the ability to do all of those kinds of things is very, very important. And then third, I would say, just from an overall grid management standpoint, the utility during certain times of day and certain times of the year have an interest in being able to pull back on, the amount of electricity that's delivered. And fleets need to be aware of that and make sure that that's okay with them, and make sure that if they do participate in those programs, that they're actually doing it in such a way that they're going to get enough fuel to those vehicles during non-off shifts, during shifts that they need to, when they need it for those shifts.
Okay. So that's super interesting and a lot there. I just wanted to follow up real quickly on that. So the business hours is one of the biggest demands, right? Like your 8 to 5 or
Yeah.
whatever. I guess I find that surprising because I mean, talking about electrical demand, I assume that would be late afternoon, early evening up until like maybe 10 or 11 or midnight, typical time. But those business hours are often the time where that demand is, huh?
Yeah, and it's obviously different depending upon where you are, but so I'm being general, but yes,
Right.
typically because, the middle of the day is when you're using the most, HVAC, which is a huge
Okay, right.
load. That's when, in warm weather climates, that's when the air conditioning's on. Um, in cold weather climates, during, the winter, that's when you might have, electric heating,
I
most
see.
on. So it's those, that's one issue. Then you also have lighting, that's on, and really businesses are the driver of the middle of the day. So businesses
Okay.
aren't typically operating as much in the middle of the day, and you're thinking about it from a consumer perspective.
Right.
Interestingly enough, and this probably be well beyond the scope of this conversation, as you've inserted solar into the grid in certain places, what that's done is it actually has sort of to flatten and push the peak later in the day, as you described.
Right.
But it's still generally kind of in the middle of the day, and you want to shift charging to more overnight, or later in the day, later in the evening, or early in the morning. That's going to be cheaper for you.
Very interesting. And to your point, like even as we're shifting now, the seasons are shifting. It is getting colder. We had the daylight savings time revert back, right? I'm
Yeah.
driving home in the dark now.
Right.
So, I mean, those kind of things. No, it's very clear that, to your point, it can change. The plan is going to change. And it might not be a drastic change. You're not going to go from, maybe charging your trucks, 12 hours later, but those hours that they differ can make a huge cost savings. Is that fair?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Jordan, thanks so much for taking the time. I'm sure I will be bugging you again soon because now I have like 500 more questions about all this that I'd love to dive
Okay. Sure.
into.
Sure. Absolutely.
But I appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon here.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jason. It's been a pleasure.